Have you noticed that the mosquitoes are not bad this year?
I have noticed that. It's part of what I'm loving about this time of year.
Kind of amazing. You can
It
sit
is.
outside without getting eaten.
Yeah.
I kind of love it. What about you?
I thought it was all my positive energy I'm feeling lately from
Did
the
you?
people around me and myself.
No,
but
it's just the
no,
mosquitoes aren't there this year. Or not very many compared to
Right.
normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe we need more rain. I think we do need more rain.
Right.
But might as well enjoy not getting eaten.
Exactly.
Got to
That's
look for
happy
the silver
side.
lining.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where Wendy, Chris, and Eric explore the latest news stories, their work, and trends for creating and maintaining a healthy workplace culture.
Welcome to episode 46 of the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where we do our best to help you find strategies and actionable ideas to strengthen your workplace culture. And as always, as we always say, if you're not thinking about culture, you're missing opportunities to be the best you can be as an organization and to really implement your strategy. I'm Eric Stutzman. I'm here with my regular co-host, Wendy Loewen, and our guest host, Vicki Enns. We've invited Vicki onto our show to explore the topic of what we as leaders can learn from the field of mental health, from the field of counseling, and take back with us to the workplace to help us have better workplaces, to become better leaders, to have stronger workplace culture. And we've brought Vicki onto our show. We've worked with Vicki a long time. In fact, you were a guest on our show on episode 12. Remember that?
I do.
You remember?
I don't know if I remember what we talked about.
You
but
don't remember the topic was best friends at work.
Ah.
We talked about what is it to have a friend at work, and should we be striving to have a best friend at work or not? It was episode 12. So you can be forgiven if you don't remember the topic because it was almost 3 years ago.
Yeah.
When we did that episode.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so Vicki's been associated with Achieve for a long time, primarily through our other division, the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, or CTRI, where you were our clinical director for quite a few years, and you're still the regular host of CTRI's Counselling Insights podcast.
That's right.
Yeah, so you do the podcasting thing a lot.
I do.
Though the way we do it here is a little different than the way you do
Little
that
bit
one.
different. Yeah.
This is more about dialogue between the three of us and less about interviewing a guest, though we're kind of going to interview you today,
That's
Vicki.
right.
So
I'm in guest mode.
you're in guest mode,
I am,
so
yeah.
you get to do this differently.
I'm not watching the clock. That's all up to you.
That's up to me. I'll watch the clock.
We got you situated right
I know.
between Eric
Yeah,
and myself.
That's right.
I can hardly wait for the conversation today. How are you both doing?
Really well. Yeah, really enjoying. We were talking about summer just a little bit ago. And another part of this time of year that I love is it's a time of change, like not just season. We were talking about that, of course, but I also work with a lot of students and university students. And so it's graduation time, it's
Sure
shifting
is.
gears. And I always like that. I kind of like endings. You know, if it's the right amount of change, I find it exciting. So this time of year, it feels kind of invigorating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no kidding. My kids had their final school event this morning from 10 to 12, sort of an awards ceremony and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so they should be home now with the summer ahead of them.
Oh.
It is a changing day of
Absolutely.
change right
yeah,
now.
routines change. Yeah, everything.
What about you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm thinking about change and children, and all three of my children, they're in their 20s. I think you can still call them children when they're in their 20s.
Well, they'll always be your kids.
That's right. They're always
Forever.
my children forever. Are coming home on the weekend, and part of the impetus for them coming home, well, we always have a summer vacation together, but our youngest, who's turning 24, said he wanted to have his birthday party with his family, invite his grandmas. And he's living out of province. All of the children do. So they're coming back home, and he wanted to have the people that were a part of his life when he was 12 years old and sort of relive that birthday party.
Isn't that interesting? He's doubled the age
great.
now, 12 to 24.
Oh, I hadn't even
And he's
made
gonna
that connection.
Now
But
he'll do
yes.
it again at 48, maybe.
Yeah. So you have to remember the
Wow,
cake
that's
he
cool.
had at 12. Make it twice as big.
Okay, well, the cake he had
Yeah.
was based on the birthday cake that his sister had, which he was really envious of. And so he and his grandma made a pink castle cake for his 12th
A
birthday.
pink castle cake.
Yes.
That would be hilarious if you got him
So
a
I have
pink.
a picture of his pink castle cake for him.
Is that going to happen again this year, or is that a surprise and we should talk
You
about
know,
it?
we're not that far along
Oh,
yet.
all right, fair enough. Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds really
Well,
good.
why don't we tap in or dive into this conversation today around what we in our workplaces should be learning or could learn from the field of mental health, from the field of therapy, from the field of counseling. And we're going to do that. And just to remind our listeners that at the conclusion of the show, we're going to do two things. We usually end with a rant or a rave about something we've seen in a workplace that makes us either want to scratch our heads and say, you've got to be kidding, or wow, that was amazing. So I'm going to have a rave today. And then we'll conclude the show with a summary of actionable ideas or insights that people can walk away from here and right away start implementing tomorrow. Questions they can ask, strategies they can implement. And so Wendy will do that at the end of the show today. All right. So Vicki,
Yes.
how many years have you been a therapist to start off with? Is that a fair question?
It's an absolutely fair question. I was thinking about that as I was walking here today,
Oh,
and
really?
I was a little startled to do the math and realize this is year 30.
Wow.
I know.
Okay.
That makes me feel very old. Starting as a student in university in a peer counseling
Yeah.
kind of situation. But that's kind of when I always think of when I started doing this work.
Yeah,
and
for
that
sure.
was in 1995. So
Wow.
30 years. Yeah.
30 years. You've seen a lot.
And heard a lot of stories.
I
Yeah.
bet you've heard a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you've also led teams. You've been a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us about a couple of the ways you've done that before in the past?
Leading teams
Yeah.
specifically? Well, so certainly you mentioned my involvement with CTRI. So
Yes.
that's one major role that I had where I was leading teams in the clinical director role.
Yeah.
I was also a trainer here with CTRI and did some Achieve trainings as well over the years. And so the team I was involved with leading, I didn't solely lead it, but would have been the group of trainers that we have. And so largely, I think in all my leading roles, I would use the word mentor.
Mentor, yeah,
is probably the way to describe it. And that's, I think, how that role felt for me.
Yeah.
Another way, which I still do, as I mentioned with students, I think that's it's in the role of, I do a lot of supervising and
Right.
consulting for people who are either training to be counselors or therapists or who already are and just want ongoing consultation or supervision. So I am often leading a small group of therapists to reflect on their work and themselves. And again, I think the role of mentor is probably
Yeah.
the biggest way I think about doing that role.
Yeah. Fair enough. So having worked in various workplaces, having worked with teams as peer and as mentor, and then having also been a counselor and therapist for many years, we're really curious to hear some of your thoughts that come out specifically from the field of therapy and that counseling role, what you've learned about people, and thinking about what are some of the things you just wish leaders in workplaces would begin to understand, or things that if they understood, they might lead a little differently. I don't know if that's a good place to start. It's a pretty big question.
It's
but
a big question. Yeah.
do you have a thought or two you want to start with there, and then we can get into
Sure.
specific questions?
Sure. Yeah, I think, my mind goes to two places, so I'll name them both. I mean, the first one maybe seems like the most obvious, perhaps, which is just the area of mental health generally, right?
Okay.
That mental health is a thing. We all have it, and it matters. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about that more. The other area, though, that I wanted to that I thought might be a little bit different for us to talk about is that I think a lot about relationships. I work with people on a variety of different things as a counselor, but my background in education in it is as a couple and family therapist. So I work with individuals and couples and families. But what that means is I'm always kind of thinking and listening through the lens of relationships
Right.
and patterns of relating.
Right.
And so when I think about workplaces, I think that's such an important, I think lots of people do pay attention to that. I think CTRI and Achieve pay attention to that. But I think a lot of workplaces maybe don't necessarily always think about that level of process that's happening, that there are, of course, there's relationships, but there's real patterns of relating that form in the relationships at workplaces.
Right. Yeah. Like, so Wendy and I have a work relationship.
Yeah.
I suspect there are patterns that we have in our work relationship that we may not be conscious of. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's one. Yeah.
We might have a pattern of relating. So what do you wish people would know about patterns, I suppose, is another question. Or what are some of the patterns that tend to present themselves that, if brought to light or if talked about, might make a difference?
Well, I think this is where maybe those two, the mental health side and the relationship sides comes together. So recognizing that, first of all, that yes, like you and Wendy have a work relationship. Just recognizing that you also have a backstory of relationships that informs how it probably organizes and shapes a little bit also how you relate with each other. Right?
Sure.
And so when I think what's important for workplaces around that is to just understand that people come with a backstory.
Yeah.
And they come with a set of experiences about relationships. And that's going to shape how they engage and move through their relationships in the workplace as well, especially under stress. So when we're under stress, that's when our our strongest patterns come to the fore. And those are, so the reason why I'm thinking about that is important is I think those are often patterns that get misunderstood or
cause irritation and conflict.
Yes, yeah. Because we're forgetting that there's probably a backstory to them. There's a history to them.
Yeah, I'm thinking about our, Vicki, as you're talking, our podcast, our previous podcast, we talked about where leaders often focus on tasks and they neglect relationship, and that it's really important that, yes, we have work to do, we have projects that we're involved in, but we have to not let that cloud our focus on relationships as well, and that relationships as well, that we have to balance both of those at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because part of what we all bring as well into our work, into any relationship that we have, are the relational needs that we have. So again, if I just start from a place of being a counselor, a therapist, what I'm thinking about a lot with people and hearing them talk about is what are their relational needs. And as humans, we aren't that complicated in that way, right? Like it kind of boils down to, we all need some of those core pieces of feeling a sense of belonging, feeling like we matter, maybe feeling like we're likable, and also feeling like we have some agency, that we can affect, we have some power, we have some choice to affect change in our lives. And so when I think about what you just said, Wendy, yeah, like for people in their work relationships, if those needs are feeling relatively okay, then they're probably able to focus well on tasks. But if those needs of belonging or feeling safe or feeling likable or valued and worthy, if those are feeling a bit unmet, then those are going to take precedence. They're going to have a really hard time focusing on tasks.
As in, like, if I don't feel like I have agency, I'm going to do what I can to get agency or take power. Or if I don't feel seen, I'm going to consciously or unconsciously try to be seen.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Or I would think a retreat, right? Where you feel like you don't have a voice, so you'll just get quiet and you won't speak in and you're not recognized. So what does it really matter how much I engage with the work that I have?
Right. Yeah. People will go into modes of trying to get those needs met or trying to protect themselves from feeling vulnerable about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a variety of ways that people can do that at work.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm hearing you say that really we should be focusing on those really core needs, belonging, feeling a sense of value first. And often at times, I think in our workplace, we switch it around where we focus on get the stuff done.
Right. The productivity that at least there's weight given to that and attention given to that. Yeah, for sure.
Are there patterns or behaviors that you've seen in your clients that you think are often misunderstood or overlooked in the workplace?
So, yeah, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, if I think about it through, like when I'm hearing about my clients, like their experiences in their workplaces, it's normally when they have complaints right, about it, or they're having some stress about it. And so, so when I think about those stories, I think in terms of patterns that are often misunderstood, it is often those ways that they're maybe trying to protect themselves, right? Or trying to have some voice or agency because they're not feeling. So these are often patterns of like reactivity, like people who are maybe seem irritable or maybe they seem angry or aggressive. So people might go in that direction with if they're not feeling like they're being treated well or they're not being understood. Or they might go, like you were talking about, Wendy, they might withdraw and kind of start missing work, not wanting to engage as much, change their, have a hard time focusing, and so they might be avoiding. And so I think those kinds of patterns often get misunderstood because they're seen as just behavioral problems, perhaps. The other one overlooked, that you asked other patterns that are often overlooked. One other pattern I thought about that I think happens a lot in workplaces are the folks who look like they're doing really well, like the really high functioning, and the ones who you'll always go to because, well, let's just go to her because we know she'll get it done.
Yeah.
And not that that's always a problem, but I think those are the folks that often, if they're my client, they're the ones that are now burnt out.
Right. They're actually really stressed under the surface, and you're not seeing it as their supervisor or colleague.
That's right. And maybe they have a hard time saying no, or they have they've kind of just worked past their limit, and now they're in a negative state. So I think it can be. This is where the whole paying attention to mental health and wellness in a positive way can be so important. Because you don't always recognize right away that that's a pattern that might be a problem.
So, but practically, how do we do that? Wendy manages a team. I manage a team. People, they're doing great. They're getting their work done. I go to them and ask about more work. Where's the place for the leader to stop and take a pause and check? Like, I don't really know where that is.
Right.
Well, Eric, you used the word check, and I just had a conversation just a few weeks ago with a leader saying they don't do the individual check-ins anymore. Mm-hmm. They bring their team together, it's small, they have a conversation with the team, and it struck me that you're missing a lot of potentially crucial information if you're only gathering your team to check in and to plan work and to see how people are doing. Because what I would feel safe saying in a group context is very different than I would feel safe saying in an individual check-in with a trusted leader.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so it seems like a really important reminder that those one-on-one check-ins are pretty important to see where people are really at, regardless of what their behavior is, or regardless of how well they're functioning.
Yeah.
Or poorly.
Right.
Right? There's a backstory.
Yeah. And I think what that makes me think about, Wendy, is maybe the importance of just being proactive. So like you were asking, Eric, like where's the point? Like how do I know when to think about that or check about that? And so I think one of the most important things is just a proactive approach to whether you want to call it wellness or whether you want to call it just holistic self-care or as well as mental health. Is just that it's built into your practices like the regular check-ins or built into some of the language like as at a team level that we actually want people to pay attention to when they feel like they're, maybe you wouldn't use this language, but when they might pay attention to when they might be under-functioning, but also when they might be over-functioning.
Yeah.
If that's just built into the language, then there's opportunities for that awareness and conversations to happen when they do need to.
Right. Okay.
Vicki, just yesterday, I was reviewing some material for a workshop that we're going to be releasing come the new year. And it's all on managing the unexpected. And one of the areas that my sort of reading and research has led me into is this whole idea of over-functioning, especially from a leadership role.
Right.
And as a therapist, I'm not a therapist, Vicki, so if I misspeak, you will
Yeah.
inform me. But the boundaries are really important between yourself and your client, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah.
And over your years, I'm sure you've had to wrestle with that. As a leader, I know it's very easy when people are, they come forward with, they disclose something to you as a leader, to jump in and to try and fix and to scurry around and to do all of the things to try and make things better. Where does that, and you use the word overfunctioning, what are the signs that, a leader should be paying attention to that, oh, I might be overfunctioning here and I need to be really clear about what is my role in this particular situation?
So, well, let me talk about boundaries for a second, just to help frame this conversation, because I think there's lots of ways we could talk about that. But if we think about it as boundaries, often we think of the word boundary even sounds like it's the barrier between you and me.
Yes,
right? It's
right.
it's the how do we distinguish where you end and I begin, that sort of thing. And that is a helpful way to think about a boundary. But if we think about it more relationally, like we're talking now, like in a relationship, I think it's helpful to expand that a little bit, to think about boundaries almost more like what's the nature of the container that our particular relationship resides in. And so to make that a little more tangible, like when I think about me and a client, for example, like we each have very specific roles in that relationship, right? It's not exactly a reciprocal relationship. It's a unique kind of relationship. And so the kind of boundaries or container within which we function is quite unique. And so that boundary is formed, that container is shaped by what are the expectations? What's my role? Like what can we expect from each other? What are our rights and responsibilities, maybe is a way to put that in this particular relationship. So when I think about your question, like a leader with, say, an employee or a staff member or a team member, similarly, that it's a unique kind of relationship, and so it's like what are the roles that are what's the role of each person, and what are the expectations maybe that make sense within that particular relationship. So when you talk about over-functioning, this is where it's not going to be exactly the same, because even for each of you, you're leaders with many different people here on your teams, and you probably there's a lot of similarity in how you lead everybody, but there's probably also uniqueness to each relationship. And so, that's based on their role, as well as some roles will have different responsibilities than other, and as well as their unique personality and individuality. And so thinking about in this particular relationship, what's the right balance of openness and maybe asking the question. So coming more specifically to your example of if someone's over-functioning, how might, as a leader, you navigate that, if I was understanding your question. So there might be room to ask some questions and be curious, and like you said, someone share examples of what's going on for them. However, within that role, it's also, as a leader, you're not the therapist, and the workplace maybe isn't, you don't want it's not appropriate. It's not going to feel safe for the other person either if that turns into a place where they feel overexposed or too much of their personal information is known. So I think part of, if I come back to the notion of a container, as the leader, it's thinking about how do I provide a big enough container that there's openness and room to get to know the person, or that they can feel supported, but at the same time, a firm or clear enough edges to that container that you're providing guidance of how much information is shared here, how much time do we spend on this, as well as and support to maybe find other steps that might be helpful.
So Vicki, when I've done a lot of workshops, and I started off teaching in the field of mediation and specifically in a justice context where there are people who've been victimized by others, there are people who have caused harm to others,
Yeah.
and deep feelings get shared.
Yeah.
And so I've done that kind of teaching. I've also done a fair amount of teaching with teaching leaders how to coach staff.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the common responses from the people in those workshops is, but I don't want to be their therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even want to know sometimes what they're feeling because I don't know what to do with that.
Right.
And it freaks me out.
Right.
What would you say to a leader who is like that? They're like, what if somebody tells me they're really depressed? What if somebody tells me they are manic depressive? What if somebody tells me they've got a new whatever. They tell me something and I don't know what to do with it. Because I think that's a fear that a lot of leaders have. Like, I know how to be a, whatever they are, a mechanic and a lead mechanic, or I know how to be but I don't know how to be a therapist, and I don't want to be a therapist, and it freaks me out. But I know that I should pay attention to mental health. So how do I do that?
Right. Well, if I go back to how we started this conversation, and I was talking about looking at this from the point of view of relationships, and that everyone has those core needs. So in that situation, I'd think about, or I'd wonder, is it possible to, as the leader, to think about within the boundary of this relationship and within my role, how does it make sense? How can I still just at least acknowledge and have room to, so that might be through just some basic curiosity, a little bit of empathy, just to acknowledge and that there can be a connecting point around maybe this person's, some of their vulnerability, some of those needs. However, that doesn't mean that as the leader, that I then need to try to solve all the issues or meet the need entirely.
Right.
But then it's maybe then recognizing, maybe I'm going to do some validating and have some empathy. And then part of the role, it might be helping the person think about what's the plan of what are some other resources that they maybe could access to help them meet the need.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the idea of that's where the boundary comes in. Like being clear about in this relationship, this is what makes sense. This is kind of what fits within my role, and this is what doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can I summarize in my language
Absolutely.
what you just said?
Yeah.
See how this fits. Somebody shares with me. I ask somebody, "How you doing?" Say, "I'm terrible. Things are not going well."
Right.
As a leader, I don't have to fix that.
Right.
And I think a lot of leaders feel like they have to fix things.
Right.
They have to solve things. So
Yeah.
I just need to say, it's not my thing to fix.
Right.
So I can start by giving myself some space.
Right.
That sound like a good starting spot?
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
have
you're saying that to yourself.
Yeah. I'm not going to fix this, Joe.
That's your inside
but you
voice.
say that to yourself, so you give
Yeah.
yourself a little space.
Absolutely.
I don't have to fix this.
Yeah.
But what I need to do is be a human being in the conversation.
Right.
Which means,
Yeah.
wow, that sounds tough.
Yeah.
What's important about that for you? Or
Right.
you're telling me that.
Yeah.
What are you hoping for? And maybe just a couple of curious questions,
Right.
and then the boundary is, so what do you want to do with that?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming that's affecting you at work. I'm not a counselor or therapist, but
Right.
what are the resources you can access to deal with that?
Right.
Is that sort of what you're saying?
That's a great example. And it helps clarify, helps me maybe clarify one of the points here, which is I think exactly what you named is that there's maybe a fear of, I don't know how to help this with this, or I don't know what the answer would be. And so then I think this is just a human nature thing, not just a leader thing. But then I think, so then often people, they skip over, like they try to jump to just solve the problem or get rid of the problem.
Yeah,
And they
right.
skip over just the human piece.
Right.
And so so I think that's a great example. It's basically, there's such power in just that, if we come back to that core need of just human-to-human connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of, hey, I see you.
Right.
If I think it's very fitting for leaders to think about just tapping into that need, and that might be the end of it. When I think about with my clients, like, again, where people are talking about their workplaces or where that comes up the most, I was thinking about a whole bunch of stories as I was getting ready for this, and the theme, I think, probably the most common theme when people have distress or if there's a negative impact on their mental health is when it's often either in their team, but leaders have a big impact on people when they don't feel like their leaders care about them.
Right.
When they don't feel seen. That's probably, if I were to summarize it into the most common negative story I hear, that's kind of the theme. And so it comes back to what you're saying, like just the power for leaders to recognize that they absolutely have the capacity to just see their people, like, and just say, hey, I see you. I mean, you don't have to say it that way, but the way you did, right? It's like, oh, that sounds hard.
Yeah.
That sounds really stressful.
Yeah.
I have no idea how to help you with that, but let's figure out how to get you some help, right?
Yeah,
But that moment of just human connection is hugely powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, Eric, so as you said, taking that pause and being compassionate with yourself and then not jumping to the fix, but to giving that compassion to the person that you're listening to and asking them, what do you need?
Right.
And how can I support you in meeting that need?
Right.
So that they can, exercise their own autonomy, their own agency in finding out what they need.
Right.
Because I think the other piece for me that I wrestle with is you use the word, the idea that it's impacting their ability to be at work. It's also probably impacting the people around them.
Right.
And, the quality of work that they're doing. And so I'm struggling with you have to wrestle, you have to balance both of those. It's caring for the person and also caring for the larger team that they're a part of.
Right. Absolutely.
Would you have any sort of guidance in that regard?
So when I think about balancing that, I mean, I'm trying to think of a more tangible way to put that. But it really does come down to that. Like, I think this is where it's hard to give a specific 3-step plan or something.
Oh, come on. You make it really simple for us.
I can make one up if I were to make one up.
Fair enough. Like, people are complicated. Yeah.
I think, my point is I think there's an art to it, right? And it's not going to look exactly the same every time. Mm-hmm. That's my point. But I could turn it into a 3-point, or let's see if I can come up with 3. But it's probably, the first one would be pause, right? Like pause. And like you were illustrating with your example, Eric, it's like check in with yourself, give yourself a little pep talk, or, whatever helps you kind of get grounded. I mean, again, that's very counselor language, but kind of get settled and not go into our own reactive mode.
Right, which is easy to do. When you see somebody else in distress, you might feel distressed too. It might trigger your own things or trigger the need to be the solver or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, which, just as a side note, I mean, that's another important piece of people bring their stories to work. Leaders do too.
We do.
Yeah.
So when people are in a reactive or a vulnerable place, it's going to bring up our own histories of that, as a side note. But if we come back to our 3-point plan. So I think it's pause, kind of check in with yourself or breathe or get settled. Mm-hmm. And then just offer some kind of just human validation and connection. And that might be in the form of empathy, it might be in the form of curiosity, but it's in that human connection. Does that work as a 3-point plan? I think so.
Yeah, if you say point, it's curiosity and empathy. If those are separate points, then you've made 3 points.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. There we go.
Maybe the third point is, after you've offered curiosity and empathy, asking the question, so what do you want to do with this conversation? Or where do you want to go with this? Or what are your options? So maybe that's the third part, is
what's next?
What the future looks like. Is that appropriate, like for a leader to do it that way?
I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wendy, as we were preparing for this, you had a whole pile of questions for Vicki that you came up with. Are there ones that you really want to ask?
Well, now I have another one.
Okay, go for it.
So last week had a conversation. You talked about a container, like being clear around, in this relationship, what is that container? What can we expect of each other? What are those edges? And the conversation that I was having was around the use of family in relation to work. And I'm I really struggle with that as the right container to be talking about work and our teams.
Like you mean like the idea of it being like a family?
The workplace family. Like people say, our workplace, we're like family
Yeah.
here. Or this is
Right.
I mean, it's
Yes.
it's heartwarming, and there's a
Right.
certain level
Yeah.
of like emotional resonance with that.
Right.
But I don't think it's the right verbiage for that container.
Can I ask you why? What do you think? Why? What are the limits to that?
Well, I'm thinking on the spot, but I think, you don't choose to leave your family unless there's usually some real
Right.
difficulty or trauma involved. But in a workplace, you want people to have the best expression of,
Right.
their gifts and abilities. And so you might actually celebrate them leaving.
Ah.
There are times when somebody doesn't live up to expectations, and you may potentially have to ask them to leave.
Right.
That's a pretty hard thing to do in
Right.
a family. It's also hard in a workplace as well.
Right. But yeah, the container is different. Right?
Yeah.
It is a
It's
slightly
not the same
the
thing.
roles are different. But it's interesting because I think it's both a yes and a no. Like I get the parallel. There are a lot of parallels. Like let me speak to that for a moment first. I think in my mind the parallels between a family and a workplace team is that there are relationships that get formed with specific roles in relation to each other, and there's usually there's understood, maybe or may not, maybe agreed upon, maybe not always agreed upon, rules that some are spoken,
our culture.
some
Yeah,
are
that's
unspoken.
right.
There's
That's
a culture.
workplace culture.
There's a shared history to these
Yes, there
relationships.
is.
They aren't just random people wandering in and out. I mean, you might have that too, but in terms of the work teams.
Yes.
So in that way, it's that shared history and those roles and expectations that I think forms a parallel. The other parallel that I want to say is kind of the theme that keeps coming up, which is the backstory people bring with them. So, and this is where it can be helpful to think about this a little bit more consciously, whether people think of their work relationships as family relationships or not. We are all typically playing out some of our family history relationships with each other, especially for those of you, in leadership roles, and I feel this as a supervisor or teacher. You're going to get everybody's projections of their unfinished business with their mother and their father and their grandpappy, and it's all going to their last three bosses, right? Like, and so, and as teammates will play out their siblings, they may or may not have sibling relationships, but those are part of the patterns those are the relationships where we learn how to get those core needs met.
Sure.
And so we're going to bring those patterns of how we move through the world into our workplace. So I think there are a lot of parallels that do happen, but I also agree with you, Wendy, that it's helpful to realize also how it's different, right? And it's because sometimes if folks think about their work relationships as family, then maybe unconsciously, but there's also maybe an expectation that they're going to get all those same needs met that we tend to attribute to family relationships, and that can sometimes get in the way.
And some of the things we do in families, hug each other, sit next to each other on the couch tight, those aren't necessarily always appropriate in a workplace, right? So there's, the metaphors only go so far, right? And I've often been uncomfortable with the metaphor of family and workplace too. It's not that I don't care for and love my colleagues, but I rarely say to them, "Have a good night, love you," right?
Right.
Like I would with my kids or
right.
my partner, right?
Right.
So
again, the container is different, right? The roles are slightly different.
And there's power in families, there's power in workplaces.
Right.
We choose our workplaces. We rarely choose our families unless we're
Right.
choosing a partner, and then
Right.
we get their family that comes along with it. But that's an interesting question, Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe there isn't a right or a wrong answer. It's about how we think about.
Right.
The important pieces are that we offer belonging, care, we listen, we know what the expectations are when we
Right.
come to our workplace. We know that people bring stories, that there's,
Right.
potentially mental health issues. We may not be therapists, but we want to support people
Right.
in finding the support that they need, which may be at work and sometimes not at work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other piece that's standing out around that is that we've been talking about is just clarity around the boundary or around the role and the expectations in the relationship. Just as a quick anecdote on this notion of family and work parallel, I was actually just having this conversation this morning with somebody around. I'll skip all the details because that's not important, but just around this notion of how we can be in relationship, we can really maybe notice the difference between those roles when we shift places. So we were talking about how, like someone who's in a specific role at work, for example, in a leadership role, very often goes home and might have a hard time shifting into home role,
yeah,
right?
right.
Like,
yes.
like someone who's a pilot, for example, they have a lot of power and necessarily so, and they have to use that in a particular way. But then they often go home and they're still the pilot at the dinner table, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an important skill that we all need to cultivate to be able to be aware of what is our role and how do we want to use that role. And how do we also want to shift that role? This is reminding me, I think I was listening, I think you had a conversation, this links to a conversation you had on power in a recent podcast too.
Yeah,
So
right.
kind of links in with that, how we use our power and our role.
It's a really good reminder. I didn't expect this podcast to go in that direction specifically, Vicki, but I like that we take our roles home with us
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
We do.
I know we often think about we take our workplace pain home, but we also take our roles home, not
Yeah.
necessarily even pain. Like, so my title is Chief Executive Officer. I do not want to be a Chief Executive Officer of
Right.
my family.
Yeah.
I want to be an equal to my partner. We have different skill sets. We work together, but it's not,
Right.
I don't want to bring that into my family. And maybe we
Right.
as leaders need to think about that too when
Right.
we leave work, that
Right.
we
Right.
need to leave that role.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at work, our function, our roles, our expectations are less fluid than they are when we're in our personal lives and at home.
Right, yeah.
Like a CEO, you have specific responsibilities
Specific ones.
that are contained at work.
Right. Yeah. And likewise, one important part of my identity is as parent, father to my children. But I'm not people's father here. I'm not the parent here, right? And so that's an also important thing. Like you're talking about what we bring to work, the backstory, that was ways of acting. I act that way at home as a parent, but I need to shift
Right.
a little bit as I come into the workplace and be
Yeah.
aware of how those patterns affect me as a leader here.
Right. Yeah.
And another thing that you said earlier on that I think we can all take away from this conversation is the reminder that when we see somebody else in distress, disclosing a mental health thing, whatever it might be, it's going to activate, or it can activate, our own stories.
Right.
And that pause, maybe in checking in with ourselves, could also be helpful there. What stories am I bringing right now?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because like you were just reflecting on, we can bring our work roles home to our families or to our home lives, and it goes the other direction too, right? So yes, recognizing that in our interactions at work, how we respond might be shaped by what are our roles in other parts of our lives, or what have our experiences with that been. And so if we're conscious about that, just how do we want to show up in this particular relationship can help guide us through that interaction.
I think we have time for one more question, Wendy.
Okay, do we want to
Is
arm
there
wrestle?
something that's just... Why don't you go ahead, Wendy?
I'm thinking about a lot of our listeners and clients work in, there's so many different industries that they work in. And so if you work in mining or manufacturing, that's a different workplace culture than an office culture. Or
Yeah,
if you work in for a social, not-for-profit or a social service agency. But regardless of what industry you work in, if there was a principle that would be helpful in creating, that container where people feel safe and they belong, and it represents, even if it's not used, the terminology internally of being trauma informed, what would be your suggestion in that regard? What are those principles that doesn't matter where you work? If you're a leader of an organization, you want to create a culture where people belong and feel safe and are trauma informed. What would that be?
Well, I think I would go back to the tried and true concept of curiosity. Might be a good way to curiosity and relationship, as we've been talking about today, like just the importance of that. And how I'm thinking about that in relation to your question is the power of just being curious to get to know people or see them as people. I mean, again, like you're saying, every workplace will be different, and relationships, you aren't always necessarily going to be getting to know each other on a deeply personal level. But just to recognize that everyone, as we've been saying all along, has their own story and their unique experiences that they bring. And so, I think to create the kind of, if we're talking about create a workplace that is conducive to well-being, to psychological safety, to people, to product, as well as productivity and doing well in their roles. If we remember that human-to-human connection piece and in whatever way it makes sense in a particular place, being able to make space to make room for that. So that's where curiosity, being curious about people, and if there's opportunities to make those connections, as we've talked about throughout this conversation.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Vicki, one of the things that's going to stick with me from this conversation is the people that come to see you that are in distress about work often don't feel seen. Or they don't feel understood. Mm-hmm. So what that tells me is, and the question in my mind is, am I seeing people for who they are and what's going on? Do they feel understood by me? That's what I should take away as a leader from that.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
I really like that. And one way to do that is to ask questions, to be curious, to be open to what people have to say, to empathize, as you've been saying.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So we've come to that part of a show where we have a rant or a rave. And I prepared a rave today that I'm going to share. And so this is it. I went to a leadership retreat last week in a city outside of the province, Vancouver. I went with 5 other leaders who are all CEOs of their organization. And the thing that struck me was the agenda of the retreat was to understand our emotional experiences in the last month or so in our personal life, our family life, and our work life. And to dig deep to understand why those emotions were coming up when we thought. So we had like a big list of emotions.
Wow.
And we asked ourselves, what were the strongest emotions I was feeling at home, in my family life, in my personal life, and at work? And why? Like, what was significant about that for me? And our job, the rest of us, as people shared, was to listen, to not solve, to not offer advice, to not talk about the problem, but to resonate. Essentially, when have I felt that emotion myself?
Sounds like a counselor was leading this retreat.
It wasn't. It was another CEO. And it was so cool because it just felt like insight started happening all around for everybody as they tried to understand their emotional experience, what it meant for them, and as people didn't try to fix it, but just listened and could share where they resonated. Oh, I felt like that one time too. It wasn't at work. It was at home, or it was wherever. And people could take from each other's stories, but not offer solutions or advice. And I think I'm just so impressed by those CEOs who you would think of as not necessarily, like, these are people from construction industries, from tech, from whatever. They're not necessarily industries where you think these are people that are going to be working to get in touch with their feelings.
Right.
But they're going to be way better leaders because they did and because they're doing that. So that's my rave. I feel proud of that group of CEOs for doing that work. And I want to encourage other leaders, not just CEOs, but everybody that listens and to think about their emotional experience.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah.
Well, and that very much echoes what Vicki was talking about. Being curious, listening to each other, not trying to fix things, but offering a safe space for people to be in.
Yeah. And the power of connecting in with those kind of what I was calling core needs, of feeling just heard and valued, and that our experiences matter. And so, yeah, it sounds like it was a really great opportunity for people there to do that within themselves and for each other. So
Yeah, it was neat. And I came away very refreshed and inspired to continue my work. So,
that's awesome.
yeah, that was really cool. Great. So we're going to wrap up the show now. We're going to turn it over to you, Wendy, to summarize a few of the tidbits, the ideas, the questions, the steps that people can take if they want to bring insight from the field of counseling and mental health therapy into their workplace to have better workplaces, a better culture. So over to you, Wendy.
Vicki, I want to thank you so much for this insightful conversation where you reminded us of the importance of creating a container, a psychologically safe work environment, a psychologically safe work culture. And for our listeners, 3 actionable items to take away. When somebody does disclose something to us and we're unsure of how to proceed, we need to, first of all, pause and remember that we don't need to be the therapist, to take a breath, to be compassionate with ourselves. Second, to demonstrate curiosity and empathy to the person who has shared something vulnerable with us. And third, to ask, what do you want to do with this conversation and how can I support you in moving forward? If you are interested in learning more from Vicki, she has co-authored 3 books. 1, Gratitude and Grit Journal. 2, Self-Care Transformed. And 3, a little book of trauma-informed workplaces. These will all be linked in the show notes. Thank you all for listening in today. It was a pleasure to have spent this time with you, and we're looking forward to connecting with you again next month. Please connect with myself, with Eric, and with Vicki on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Until next month, take care and be well.
Looking for free resources, training, and consulting in the areas of leadership and workplace culture? Be sure to check out achievecenter.com. That's achieve, CENTRE.com.